Hey. Hey.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Just organizing a few things here.
That's fine. I love your old school scale that you use as well in the background there.
Uh, it's more decoration. Somebody gave it to me, and I'm like, oh, it's kind of cool decoration for the office.
It goes with
Yeah,
what you
yeah,
do.
for sure. I'm like, it makes sense in here. All right. Getting some people in. Oh, we got ten already. Okay, cool.
Right.
Give
Awesome.
it just a couple more, maybe a minute or two more. Okie dokie. There we go. All right. How are you today?
Doing well. Yeah.
Doing all
Mondays are
right.
busy check-in days, so got all that done today, and that's nice.
Yeah, Mondays are always crazy, and then
Always.
see what kind of damage we have from the weekend.
Exactly.
You'll have that. Okay. All right. Yeah, we can go ahead and get going. We'll get some more jumping on, and I'll repost this too when we're done and tag you and all that,
Perfect.
so
Okay.
people will be able to rewatch it. So thanks everybody for jumping in here with us today. Erin and I are going to dive into the topic of fertility, and that's kind of a broad term, but we'll go into some different areas of that for sure. But before we do that, would you give everyone maybe a background on why this is an area of interest to you? Maybe people that follow me that don't follow you, perhaps.
Yeah. So I was introduced to the whole world of hormones and everything that has to do with that back when I was first diagnosed with cervical cancer, which came back a total of 4 times. And it was with the fourth diagnosis that I said, okay, like I've got to do something different. And so I kind of left the medical model and went more alternative health, more functional health, even though it wasn't called that at that time, because now I'm really aging myself here. But
Right.
um, and I also went through a big career change at that time, and I started working in a chiropractor's office that specialized in prenatal and pediatric chiropractic. And so I was introduced very heavily into that alternative health scene. But after a good full year of all the alternative health therapies and everything that I was doing, I found out that I was cancer free, and I have been cancer free ever since, with sticking with the type of lifestyle changes I made back then. And so a lot of that had a lot to do with nutrition. And so I learned a lot at that time, now through all the different schooling and education programs I've taken. But I started working very closely with a lot of women during that time from the chiropractic office who were experiencing some sort of hormonal issues. And then that just sort of branched out into I started helping women who were struggling with fertility. And the things that I studied and started putting into work just started working for a lot of people. And so now here we are 14 years later.
Yep.
So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
so that's kind of my background with it. And then recently, because of all the surgeries I went through with the cervical cancer, I was told to probably expect to never either have a successful pregnancy or if I was even able to get pregnant. And I now have a beautiful 5-month-old son.
Yep.
So there's that as well.
Congrats, by the way. I know I probably told you that already, but again.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. So, and really, that all happened after I just took a lot of my own advice. So,
Right.
imagine
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, some of us coaches are bad at taking our own advice sometimes, so it's easier said than done. Um, awesome. Yeah. Thanks for the background. I know you and I had kind of talked at the PEC event about I was telling you a little bit about how much I enjoyed working with these cases, and not that I didn't know that I would, but
Yeah.
I worked with the case probably, I don't know, it was several years ago. I'm like, oh, this was different, and I enjoyed it was very rewarding in the sense that you can show women that not only are they able to do things they didn't think they could do, maybe they were told they couldn't get pregnant, maybe they were told they couldn't carry successfully, like whatever it
Yeah.
might be. Not only that, but actually showing them that pregnancy doesn't always have to be the nightmare that everyone makes it out to be, right? Or that a lot of people make it out to be.
That is one of my favorite parts, because both pregnancy and giving birth and all of that, like, it really is, it just shows you how healthy you are or aren't, really.
Correct. Yeah. So before we maybe get into the weeds on any type of specifics, I thought it would be good to talk about kind of like foundational items that both of us are looking at as to why. Like let's say that somebody comes in and they want to get pregnant, right? Maybe they've tried to and they weren't successful, or maybe they've never tried and they want to. What are some like baseline things that we're going to look at right off the bat? This is like general population. Maybe they've been a dieter for a while. It doesn't have to be necessarily like a hardcore competitor or anything.
Yeah.
So what is kind of the baseline?
Baseline, first and foremost, make sure they're eating enough. I would say one of the biggest things I see holding women back is this belief that, that they need to be existing on 1,200 calories a day. And that's just not enough to support their own body, much less their own body growing another body. Hi. So, a foundation is making sure they're eating enough, but also then there's some lab work that I like to see just so that we know a good baseline of what we're dealing with. And then getting much more specific as far as diet, supplements, and then lifestyle stuff as well. Sleep, stress levels. Oh gosh, just general, the
Right.
general lifestyle stuff.
Same stuff we do with everyone else, right?
Exactly.
I mean, for the most part, I mean, it's having a menstrual cycle, ovulating, like these things are markers of health,
Yep.
right? If you think about it, like we are designed, women are designed to, withhold these functions if they're compromised, right? So
Yes.
like the body's really smart. It's like, okay, you're not in a good position to conceive. We're not going to have a cycle, or we're going to have an ovulatory cycle. Like we're not going to ovulate, but whatever it might be. And that's why when I see these cases where it's like, and I'm not saying that like IVF and these things are necessarily have no place, but
I agree.
it's frustrating to see that you're pushing a body that has really no business in conceiving at that time into forcing it to do so,
Yeah.
right? And then and then we run into miscarriages like over and over again, repetitive. You hear that a lot. It's like a lot of women that have them don't just have one. A lot of them have a lot, multiple, right?
It's very sad too.
Right,
Yeah.
of course. And it's like these functions are very protective. So, if you are one of those people, it's your body's telling you everything you need to know.
Yes.
At that point.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up the whole miscarriage thing, because so many women come to me with repeat miscarriages and say, oh, well, I'm infertile. And I'm like, that's not what I would call infertile. You're very fertile. Your body is wanting to get pregnant, but at the same time, there's something stopping that from being a healthy pregnancy. So what is that? And many times that's where deficiencies, overstressed type of stuff starts to show up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of the time, like lack of progesterone, during these phases, because we know that's one of the first things to go with women is, and I know you see a lot of labs. I see like millions of sets of labs, probably not millions, but a lot of sets of labs.
Probably millions.
And it's like, no matter what, Gen Pop, competitor, anyone, the the less than 0.1 progesterone is like the everyday
Yeah.
thing. I'm seeing
Like
almost nobody has progesterone.
bottom, bottomed out
Almost nobody.
progesterone.
We it's kind of a it's actually kind of a joke within like the people that I mentor and stuff, that if someone has progesterone over like 1.0, it's literally a miracle anymore,
Yeah.
because almost everyone's bottomed out.
I just had a client get her labs over to me. We've been working together for a week only, so but I'm still waiting on her lab results. And they just came through today. And I was just like, woohoo, progesterone of 14.
Oh my
Like,
goodness. Yeah,
that's
right.
amazing. And I was like, okay,
Right.
so we're switching gears.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So that's the biggest thing is just before we even dive into any supplementation or anything with these people, is just like literally making sure that lifestyle parameters are set, right? Because it's either, I feel like it's a lot easier, and you see this too, and this is kind of like a societal norm, is like, we're pregnant, now we got to get our shit together. It's like, okay, well, you should have already done that.
yeah. So my big thing that I tell women, I say, always think of this in 3 and 6 month increments. I'm sure we were going to get to this, but like how healthy you are leading up into pregnancy is how healthy you, like, that's just setting the base for how healthy of a pregnancy you're going to have. And you are literally building another human's life at this point. So it is worth getting on top of your own health, minimum of 3 months before trying to get pregnant, ideally a year before, like, it's worth it. And then on the progesterone topic and lifestyle factors alone, a lot of people don't realize that if you're running on adrenaline decreases progesterone, and things as simple as too much coffee, or even coffee in general for some people, can increase that adrenaline in the body, and that's just driving down that progesterone. So there's all kinds of lifestyle factors that really need to be addressed first and foremost.
Right. Yeah, everyone's susceptibility to stress is, in terms of like what their resilience to stress is a better way to describe it, is
Yes.
different. So for example, like I see women that they, even with like over exercising a little bit, periods gone, like out the window,
Yeah.
right? They have like a bad month, or they're too anxious, like gone.
Yeah.
Right. And then some can handle a lot. There's some that can handle quite a bit. They're pretty resilient to it. I'm not saying that's a good thing, that it's a
Right.
good thing that they have it, but they can certainly handle larger amounts. And I've always theorized that there's a lot of factors. Like I feel like there's probably a lot of like evolutionary factors in your ethnicity and some different things that probably go on there that kind of determine that. But yeah, so like you said, that I love that you said even a year, right? So I know when I get into a client that comes in that's one of their goals, I'm thinking, okay, well, what do we need to fix? Maybe it takes us 3 months, 6 months to fix it, and then how long do we need to hold that position before we actually,
Exactly.
are that you're ready?
Yeah.
Right. That's a long process.
Yeah. Because a lot of times the win is the maintenance of holding on to whatever you fix. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about lab work a little bit. So we have a client comes in, we're kind of getting into the weeds a little bit with them. And you talked about this a lot at the PEC. So maybe go over the basics of like what they should even be checking first.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. I so often will have clients come to me who are, and I'm often a last stop for people after they have tried IVF and IUI, and yeah.
Right.
And it's so frustrating to be their last stop and realize that the very first things that should have been addressed by their doctor were never even checked. And it happens every single day. So, of course, estradiol, total estrogen, testosterone free and total testosterone, progesterone. I like to see luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, a full thyroid panel, including reverse T3, reverse T4, definitely more than the typical just checking a TSH, which just last week I had a client say, my doctor says everything's great. And I said, okay, send it over to me. And she says, and I'm looking, I'm like, your TSH is a 0.1.
Right.
Like, yeah, like, no, everything is not okay.
Right.
That needs to be way up. And so those are basic minimums of what I'd like to see, but also even like to see a full CBC and CMP lipids a lot of times, because if somebody's HDL cholesterol is super low, then they're just not having the proper type of fat intake to even support hormone production and utilization in the body. So that's where lipids are also important, even in fertility. Gosh, have I missed any? Sex hormone binding globulin. And I mean, I love to see a Dutch test. I love Dutch. And then, especially in the case of recurrent miscarriage, I really like to see a hair test mineral analysis, or a hair test mineral. And I'm an HTMA provider. And so if somebody is willing to do that, because that can tell us a lot about deficiencies in the body, because again, repeat miscarriages and infertility, it's typically a side effect of some sort of really bad malnourishment of some sort. So it's like, okay, let's get to the bottom where minerals all jacked up and that kind of thing. So it really depends on what they're dealing with, if they've even tried, but those are the basics, I guess.
Yeah. And we can also, if we can't get the hair mineral, like we can at very least, like we should be looking at their CBC to see if there's any of those flags are in there. That might give us some indication of some deficiencies and things at least in the blood level, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
We can still get some insight.
For sure.
I would say, I don't know what your experience is necessarily, but I mean, I would say that the majority, so over half of the women that come in have at least some deficiencies that are visible on labs, because,
Absolutely.
And it's a lot. Men get them too, but women, they eat less food, right?
Yep.
Generally. Less food means less opportunity to consume micronutrients, right? They tend to have less resilience to stress. They tend to be more susceptible to gut issues. So it's like all these things, less, absorption issues. So all those things
Much
kind of
more
are
likely to have an autoimmune disease.
Yeah. Yep. So you're susceptible to common nutrient deficiencies, B vitamins, zinc, copper, maybe like magnesium, things like that we absolutely need.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about specifically maybe the few micronutrients or minerals that are ultra important or that you see off most often?
Magnesium, B vitamins, but then sodium, potassium really need a really good balance, and I very often see one way up here and one way down here, and you really need to bring those more like here. And then iron, but in a way that's different from what the mainstream medical community is often pushing. Because I feel like mainstream doctors are constantly throwing iron supplements at women and that kind of thing. But iron, you have to think of it in nature, it's oxidizing, right? Like it rusts, it ages.
That's what I would say.
And so, especially if you're getting to be an older mom or attempting to be a mom in an older age, like more than likely you're not anemic. You have an iron buildup elsewhere in your body that's not showing up in the blood. Or, that's the kind of thing to explore, because anemia is thrown around way more often than it should be. And then copper. Copper is very, very important, but hardly ever tested for. And copper can determine someone's estrogen levels. And so if they're depleted on copper, the estrogen isn't going to be correct at correct levels. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of a lot of minerals there I just threw at you.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, I like the piece about iron, especially because one of the things that I see a lot of is like, so iron, it's like testing iron is broken down into a few things. We're looking at blood iron and ferritin and maybe iron binding, perhaps, depending on how you're testing it. I see a lot of, and iron, like inflammation will hoard iron.
Yes.
So like, for example, the most common one that I will see is, for those that aren't familiar, ferritin's literally a storage, is kind of like how much iron is stored, right? Whereas iron serum is how much is just kind of circulating and free to use or whatever. So ferritin hoarding is actually an inflammatory response by the body. So like a lot of time we would see like normal to low iron on testing iron itself, iron serum, and then ferritin is super high, right? So you better believe if ferritin's super high, you probably have a lot of stored iron in tissues and stuff in other places like adipose tissue, bone, anywhere that like
liver.
The body loves to liver. Yeah, loves to store iron. So pay attention to that. That's another thing to kind of look for. Is that's why like when I see that huge discrepancy between the two, I'm thinking, that's a problem, because normally that tells us slow detoxification, gut issues, whatever it may be, right? Liver needs support usually.
Yes, liver is a very common starting place for me with people, because I can look at these types of things and see, okay, we've got some, I call it liver congestion happening.
Yeah, that's a good term. I like that.
Because it's definitely not processing like it should be.
Right. Yeah, I know like detox is kind of like a catchy word, but it's not inaccurate. I mean, that's what we're trying to accomplish.
It's just overused is all, and greenwashed. Yeah.
So once we've kind of gone through the initial labs and we've been able to accumulate that information, and we start supporting, let's talk about nutrition and exercise some as well, and how that kind of plays into this, because it plays into it in several different ways. So how much of it we're doing, from like how much can you recover from, and what's an adequate or sufficient amount for you. And then the second part of that is just doing it in general to strengthen your core, prevent like imbalances in your body, because you are carrying a beach ball in the front of your body that has weight to it, supporting your muscles, your musculature, right? So it's kind of like a twofold thing. Right.
Giving birth is a marathon, so you want to be physically fit for that.
Yeah. So what are some things that you like to take into consideration there, or are there some pitfalls that you maybe see in your clients?
Well, I see a large majority of women undereating, and when they are eating, it's processed, prepackaged, something, and that's when it's the processed and prepackaged stuff is when people really start being nutrient deficient, because they aren't taking in food rich in those micronutrients and minerals. And then as far as exercise, I see a lot of over-exercising or just literally no movement, just complete sedentary.
It's one or the other.
One or the other. Yeah. So somebody's either doing, like 6 days of CrossFit, or is cycling 50 miles 5 times a week, or they haven't got up off their couch yet this week.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And there's a happy middle ground to be found there.
For sure. I was literally just having this conversation before we got on here on my last call about how when you, and this goes for anything really, it's like when you start building awareness with people about what they need to be doing, sometimes, and a lot of the time, people become like hyper vigilant about it, and they just start paying attention to everything too much, and they start doing too much, and they're like, oh, well, we should do 10 times the amount, because
Yeah.
why not, right? And that goes for everything, right? So I run into that all the time. So yeah, I see both sides of it, because I don't know what populations you work with primarily, but I mean, I've actually had, in some of my cases, there were current competitors, people that were actually competing. The very first gal was a national level bikini competitor.
Yeah.
So her body had been through that.
Yeah.
Right. And then on the flip side, a one that I have right now is just a Gen Pop, plain Jane. She was losing weight, doing some weight loss with me, so on and so forth. So you kind of get both ends of it.
And so I work with a lot of hormone issues and fertility in particular, or fertility concerns. But then I also have a lot of competitors, and I love working with my competitors, and I love watching them just absolutely kill it on stage and, that kind of thing. But it's interesting how similar the two are in what you need to address. And
Sure.
I find it very fascinating. But again, it comes down to those extremes of dieting, of not eating enough, of over exercising or not exercising enough. Yeah. And I think that's why they're so similar.
Right. They are. We'll put it this way. It's pretty uncommon that we get the client that comes in that's overweight and out of shape just because they eat McDonald's too much.
Yeah. It's
that's
actually way more uncommon.
That's like the easiest person in the world to fix.
Yep.
Because
it's like,
we have
all
so
right,
much to work. Like everything we
food.
Right. Like everything we do works for that person.
Yep.
At that point.
Yep.
It's a little more difficult to start with someone that's been chronically undereating and underfed and overexercised. And, I see this even in the Gen Pop women that are having issues with fertility, and that maybe they don't exercise at all, but their lifestyle habits are still, they have no set sleep and wake times. Their patterns are very off. They undereat. When they do eat, like you said, it's processed food. Most don't overeat. They don't.
Most don't.
Some do, but most don't. Right.
So I'll bring up malnourishment, and they're like, I'm not, I eat this and this and this. And I'm like, that's not nutrient rich food. And so you can eat and still be malnourished. And then that brings up gut health. That's another big thing, because if you're not absorbing your food, it doesn't matter how good of a diet you have, so that's a whole other factor.
Yep.
So
yeah. And there's also something to be said about, we talk about like not eating. So like these people that they'll go, they get their days really hectic and they go all day and they don't eat, right? Till whenever later, right? And we have to have some kind of energy substrate to maintain during the day. So we have, our adrenal glands and liver are going to kind of work together and produce glucose and fatty acids and cortisol and adrenaline and dopamine and like all these things to just keep us going. And that's why I find that the people that do that all the time are the most anxious people, right? Because they're always like, their adrenaline is just like sky high all the time, because they're literally living on that, not on nutrients, right? And fasting in and of itself has some play and some benefits, but when you're doing it all the time and with no nutrient support like that, you're literally just riding on your liver and adrenals all day. And good luck. Well, definitely good luck with fertility, because your progesterone is going to be shot.
It's going to be gone.
Yeah. You're also going to be mineral deficient. You're also going to be nutrient, like all these things are going to be shot. So just getting people into those nutritional habits, like a common complaint is, I'm not hungry, right? Well, you're not hungry because your ghrelin, your hunger hormone, has adapted to not eating, right? So if you ate every 2 hours, you're going to be hungry every 2 hours. If you
The
eat
more
once a day, you're going to be not hungry.
yeah.
You know?
And it's just these small little basics like this of just nourish your body that most people need in the very beginning.
Yep.
There are, of course, all kinds of complex cases, but across the board, you need to be able to nourish not only yourself, but you need to also be in the habit of nourishing yourself enough to grow another human being. Like it takes food and good food.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we can go back into the exercise piece a little bit too, because maybe kind of burst a couple of the myths that are out there about training during, because I know, and I think you and I may have said this in the presentation or we talked about it, I can't recall, but you don't have to change that much normally if you're already weight training.
Yeah. If you're weight training, then you can typically stay pretty consistent. But the high intensity stuff, the high intensity cardio, that kind of stuff is usually working against someone's hormones, adrenals. Again, it increases the cortisol, increases the adrenaline, all of that.
Yeah.
And especially a lot of women are now putting off trying to get pregnant until their mid or late 30s. We're seeing just kind of a general trend in that in society. So you really have to be cognizant of the natural hormonal changes that a woman goes through during these years anyway. And so if you are, again, either under eating or pushing the body for way too long, way too hard, which is not in a just typical resistance training program, then yeah, you're probably going to need to dial back the intensity some.
So what if we flip it and say, what about a client that's coming in and not doing any exercise? So, do we want to throw them right into, a very structured weight training program that's 4 or 5 days a week? Do we want to, because what we want to do is we want to support, like I said, that musculature and all these things during their pregnancy, right? But let's say they've been doing nothing. So, we want to start them on something.
Low intensity cardio. And I like to start at 3 days of a not crazy resistance training, maybe even like a dumbbell only kind of workout regimen, because that's still going to be a huge change from doing nothing.
Right. Yeah, because, we're talking about stress load for someone that's been doing nothing. If we toss them right into the deep end, that may be too much. Even though that's less than what a lot of people are doing, it's too much of a shift for them personally. Yeah. So
in those cases, I always explain to them, I'm like, just so you really understand, you're not training to be a professional athlete.
Right.
We are just trying to make your body good and strong. When you are pregnant, a baby sucks minerals straight out of your bones, hence why so many women do come out of pregnancy with osteoporosis and tooth decay and that kind of thing. And resistance training builds up bone density. So let's just get started there, even just 3 days a week. And they're usually like, oh, okay. You're like, that makes sense.
Right.
I'm like, we're not trying to make you Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Right. Yeah. I normally would do something pretty similar, but I encourage them to challenge themselves still, to actually get stronger. Now, that's really, really easy to do if you've been doing nothing. Like by default, you should basically be able to just pick up a little bit more weight almost every workout without really having to try.
Yep.
For the most part, it's a lot of it is just making sure that, again, we're eating enough to support recovery.
Yes.
Because we're introducing more calorie expenditure, we're breaking down muscle tissue we haven't been doing.
I'll typically do a carb cycle type of approach with that as well, and bolster them with more carbs around on workout days in general, but then also more carbs in particular surrounding their workouts. So yeah.
Yep, I like that, and probably introduce it before the pregnancy starts, right? You know what I mean? Like making sure that's actually that's in play and it's already in motion before they actually go into it.
Yeah, because that first
If possible.
trimester is a bitch.
Yeah.
That first trimester is a bitch when it comes to energy levels, and all you want to do is sleep. So get into the habits beforehand.
Yeah, it's I I will work with the case, but I really, really, really try to just get people to wait a little bit if they're like, hey, I want you to help me during this, and we're trying. I'm like, give me a minute here. Like, let me
Yes.
look at some stuff first.
Yes.
you know?
Exactly.
Yeah, so totally agree with that. Trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, that covers most of the basics that we're probably looking at when folks come in. But I wanted to touch on postpartum though a little bit as well
Mm-hmm.
while we're here. So talk about how we support that transition in terms of, a lot of people want to get the baby weight off, and a lot of people want to regain that, whatever
Yeah.
they had, that strength that they've lost, and get their tummy back in, all these things. So,
Which I, as a new mom, completely understand.
right, sure. I mean, I think that like one thing to touch on with postpartum is also the pregnancy itself, and that how much weight you may or may not need to gain during it. That's
So
that's
yeah,
one thing. Go ahead.
so there's this myth of eating for two, and that is so wrong. It's so wrong. It's so wrong. When a woman enters pregnancy already eating essentially at maintenance, right? You only want to increase about 300 calories total over the course of the entire pregnancy. And that's very slowly over the course of 9.5 months, and that's really 300 calories is really not much. It can sound like a lot to somebody who has been under eating, but it's not very much at all, which is, the people watching this, I'm sure a lot of them have a bodybuilding background, and as they know, 300 calories is nothing. So you really want to also during pregnancy be focusing on a nutrient-rich diet. And I know that is much easier said than done, because the hormonal cravings are real. Like, you will crave the weirdest things. And then also food aversions during pregnancy are a real thing as well. Specifically surrounding protein. But you have to think, like, building a baby is literally a process of protein synthesis, just like building muscle, if not more complicated. And so you really want to focus first and foremost throughout the pregnancy on a good, nutrient-rich, whole food diet, because that is going to determine how easy or not that it is to bounce back. And I hate the whole bounce back culture after pregnancy, because a woman's body is still going through a lot of changes for a year after pregnancy. And so if she dives straight right back into dieting, especially if she is breastfeeding, then she's going to end up in a much further depleted state that she started in. So
Yeah,
that's where the diet through pregnancy becomes important.
I like that you said 300 calories to kind of give some perspective there, because it's not that much, right? So, no. I have, and it's going to vary. Like, the amount of weight, we can't really put a number on it because it is going to vary person to person.
For
but
sure.
A better way to think about it is the amount of, like, body fat change in the person, right? You don't need to, like, let's say, for example, if you gain 20 pounds, 25 pounds, I don't know, whatever it might be, you don't need to gain 15 pounds of fat, 5 pounds or 10 pounds of fluid and 5 pounds of baby, or, 7 pounds of baby, right? Like, that's a really poor, that's not a favorable ratio of weight gain, right? So, and again, it will vary, but, like, in a lot of the cases that I've worked with, I always say, like, if you turn the person to the back and you couldn't see their belly, would everything look relatively similar, maybe a little bit of weight, some fat gain, right? Not a lot, but some, depending on how lean they started also, I should say. And my really lean people, I do want them to gain a little bit more when we start.
Yeah.
Like I'll let them gain a little bit more on purpose,
Yeah.
but for the most part, it doesn't look a whole lot different, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
And if you turn them to the front, it's just the belly kind of on this a similar body,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
You've seen the nightmares, you know, everyone's seen or had them, maybe people that are listening, I don't know. And this is, and you brought up another really great point about cravings, because one surefire way to continue to feed cravings is to eat like shit, because you are going to continue to, you will disrupt your microbiome in your gut. That's going to give
Yep.
you more cravings and more cravings and more
Pregnancy is
cravings.
already a time of disrupted microbiome,
Yeah.
just in general. And that's why so
100%.
many women have reflux and all this stuff that comes up, which there's still an all-natural answer to. You don't have to, pound Tums the whole time you're pregnant. But it's already a big change of microbiome changes, or a time of big changes there. So again, that's where if you just are eating sugar and seed oil, vegetable oil, grease crap, like, you're only going to make it harder and worse on you and baby.
And that's a societal thing, right? Because they kind of joke about it, right? It's I'm pregnant, so I'm gonna eat this, and that's the only thing that I could eat because that's all I craved or whatever it may be. And not realizing that the reason those are the only things that you crave is because you were perpetually feeding this cycle of cravings.
Yep.
Right. So
it's just an ugly revolving door.
100%. I know that it's really cool to see. So my favorite cases are the ones that this is their second child or third or whatever it is, and that they've had this really bad experience, and then they come in and they don't gain 1,000,000 pounds, and they don't have they maybe still have cravings, but they're exponentially less than before. And those are really cool to see when you can kind of fuel that proper function like that.
And in my experience, they always have a much better birth too.
100%.
And
yes,
that's the big main moment, right? So, like, who wouldn't want that to be as good of an experience as possible? And there's, at that point, for the most part, if you've been fueling your body really well and moving your body on a regular basis throughout pregnancy, then birth is it's going to be a positive experience and not this movie version of screaming and hating everything about that moment.
Right. And one thing we didn't, you kind of alluded to it, is all of this isn't just affecting you, it's affecting your child as well. Like, that's, we're getting into, that's kind of a whole subtopic in that. And I was talking about this with a client today about, they were a mentorship client. They were concerned about one of their clients' intake of, certain things and stuff while they were pregnant. We were talking about how it affects developmental disabilities, like some of the research that's there. So now there's some research showing, microbiome issues causing some of these developmental disabilities, autism, people on the spectrum. So all of these things matter in the health of your child as well.
Yeah.
You're feeding them. You are the one feeding them, right? So, that's pretty critical.
It's very critical, in my opinion. There are a lot of studies now proving that multiple things about the child's outcome, health throughout childhood, throughout their young adult years, that kind of thing, very much starts in the metabolic processes that are put into action during pregnancy. So I hate ever feeling like I'm saying something triggering, because I understand there are also environmental factors and that kind of thing. But with so much in this world out of our control, that's when it becomes even more important to control those things that we can, which is absolutely what we put in and on our bodies. But metabolic health is really set up for life in pregnancy. And it's something to consider,
Yeah, I mean, now I don't want to guilt anyone here, but
Right.
that's
That's not why I'm saying any of this, but it is something that needs to be taken into account.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. So, man, yeah, I mean that postpartum. I think the only other thing I would really add is that it's critical to listen to your body.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to understand your recovery capacity, listen to your body, to slowly reintroduce things in terms of training and exercise or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
Nutritionally, again, if you're breastfeeding, you still have a slightly elevated nutrition requirement, right? Because
Yeah.
you do need to produce, you need to lactate, you need to be able to produce nutrients. So, don't, like you said, don't go and slash your calories right afterwards.
Yeah.
Those things should be considered.
I personally try to get my clients to not even think about any sort of dieting, like a true going into a deficit whatsoever in the first year postpartum. That doesn't mean that you won't lose baby weight. That doesn't mean any of that. But you've got to be, especially if you're breastfeeding, you've got to be super careful, just to make sure that, again, you don't end up in a state that very well could have caused, if you were dealing with infertility issues to begin with. Because if you just have to put your health first, really. I'm just trying to think of the best way to say that. Again, I'm not trying to guilt anyone, because I understand that people have their own personal goals and they are more than entitled to have those. But for instance, I don't like to see somebody say, okay, I'm going to get back on stage, if it's like somebody who's competed before. I'm going to get back on stage within a year of giving birth. And it's like, is that really the best thing for your body, or even your baby? But it doesn't mean you can't still get right back into decent shape just through staying active and those types of things. My typical client who I work with throughout their entire pregnancy will come out of pregnancy up maybe 20 pounds. And they have stayed fairly, they've been working out a minimum of 3 days a week throughout the pregnancy. That typically means it was an easier birth. And when you have an easier birth, you can get back to physical activity levels faster. Yeah. So again, it's very much like, all right, let's keep you moving and eating well. And you will bounce back better than if you were to just come out of that and be like, all right, I'm going to diet again at 8 weeks postpartum. And then I want to bring up this just because it's been in the news so much with a recent thing that happened, but postpartum depression. I would say that across the board, postpartum depression is the result of nutrient depletion, because pregnancy is already a complete state of depletion. Baby is sucking minerals out of mom all day, every day, in order to build their little skeleton and their brain and their heart and all of that. So that's just another reason to hit nutrition really hard. Make sure you're eating a very good anti-inflammatory type of whole food diet throughout pregnancy, because I can promise mentally, emotionally, you will come out of pregnancy much better. Because if you're just eating processed junk and sugary junk and that kind of thing all the time throughout pregnancy, that's just depleting you more and more and more, on top of the depletion you're going through from building a human.
Cool. Yep, agreed. Awesome. Well, we're gonna cut it off there. So that was a great chat. I appreciate you coming on today. I will reshare, tag you. So if anyone wants to rewatch this, if you came on late, feel free. And I really appreciate you coming on. How can people reach you if they want to inquire about services?
Either message me here on Instagram. I also have a link in my profile to schedule a consult. And then you can also email me, Erin, ERIN, @relentlessforever.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for this, Austin.
All righty. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye-bye.